Hello, I'm sorry, we're running a bit late. I hope you can hear us. So, good morning, everyone. I'd like to thank you all for being here today at our Confcap Conference 2021 on autonomy, choice, inclusion in society. What access to rights, what support, and what governance do we need? So I, along with all the members of the Capdroits Coordination Committee, including many researchers, would like to welcome you to our conference for this year. An autonomous life, choice, and governance are all issues that sometimes lead people to be very negative and talk about how terrible the situation is. However, it's true that people may be ill, isolated, they may not have family support, they might not have everything they need. In that terms, they may be rejected, stigmatized. So persons who are in a vulnerable situation due to their disability have sometimes a psychiatric record along with their peers. They have different structures, psychotherapy centers, hospitals, different mobile services, and a number of other public structures for their support. In terms of employment, persons with disabilities are are often unemployed, and it is very difficult for them to get into the normal job market. They are often subject to guardianship measures. Their own needs are rarely taken into account, and with the very few financial resources they have, it's very difficult for them to meet their needs. They may be ill, they may be overly medicized with too many drugs such as antidepressants or mood stabilizers. They have difficulties in relationships, they have difficulties with behavioral issues, and sometimes their life seems like it's in slow motion, limited to simple survival, both on the psychological and physical levels, not to mention comorbidities. How, with this situation, can we guarantee people an autonomous life, inclusion in society? And it's true that there are special things we should do for this category of the population, and that's exactly what we'll be discussing today over the next 2 days. As well, we need to determine how to focus on citizenship, equal citizenship, and better access to employment, to social activities, nonprofit organizations, volunteer work, as well as different dedicated spaces such as the COFOR Recovery College that has started up recently in France, in order to improve the lot of persons with psychosocial disabilities. It's true that we at Capdroits have a threefold outlook with academics, persons with lived experience, and persons working in support and care. This means that we get together and we believe that mental health can be totally revamped. It's true that in society today, mental health is something everyone should be concerned with. Here, we'll be hearing from not only persons with lived experience, but also court-appointed guardians, academics, and support staff. The way people work together will improve the situation as well if it is more fluid and if people have more of a choice. And they can take measures to help them. Thank you for your attention. After hearing from Valérie, I just wanted to give you a little introduction in terms of what is special about our 2021 edition of the Confcap conference. Perhaps you were at the first two. This is our third initiative. I wanted to give you a little background on the history of how Confcap conference was designed. Back in 2017, if you were there, after the second Confcap conference, it was also, in fact, the end of our budget. And sometimes when you run out of money and you don't have a budget anymore, there's nothing you can do. But our team wanted to continue, so we all got together. And I'm talking about all kinds of experiential experience. There are people who provided their own time and involvement as volunteers as much as they could, either as partners, we have a partnership committee, and I'd like to thank you, those of you who are here, or as members of our coordination committee. Our coordination, in fact, represents all types of knowledge that we are implementing throughout the entire Capdroits program. Researchers, academics, professionals, persons with lived experience directly concerned, and all of this work together is something incredible, especially if you've never done it before. And we, as the coordination committee, have thought a great deal about the types of tools we could set up to work on governance and organization, and there's a lot of things you can't see behind the scenes, but the result is here, and it's the result of the work of our coordination committee that little by little is trying to do something innovative, something new. It's great to participate, it's great to do things, and be able to make these decisions. So I hope that in terms of our program, the decisions we've made will be something you enjoy, and we'd like to hear back from you, and we're looking forward to your involvement over the next 2 days. So it's a threefold outlook. As I said, including in the workshops, including in the moderation of plenary sessions and the sessions themselves, as well as the 4 themes of our workshops. There are people, you may have noticed, at the welcome desk here at the door, and who are participating in this as well from several of our groups in Lyon. We want everyone's voice to be heard. I just wanted to make you aware of that as a little introduction, and I hope that this conference will be something different, perhaps, for you compared to other conferences you've attended in the past. We would be very happy to get your feedback afterwards. Allow me to pass the floor to Benoît Hérault. Thank you. Thank you, Isabelle. Thank you, Valérie. Before I thank the University of Lyon, too, and our partners, I wanted to say a few words about the issues we are trying to deal with and what we've been doing over the last few years. Our initial question in 2014, when we started this whole program, was that we were looking at the CRPD as a convention that is not necessarily specific only to persons with disabilities, but a new outlook on human rights and capacity at the heart of human rights. That means something to everyone. It meant revisiting human rights. Now the challenge of application of that convention is another thing. We're talking about all types of disabilities, and of course how people feel. You may be disabled in life. The policy of disablement is really something, so it may be a question of poverty, it may be a question of vulnerability, anything that prevents you in social life to have the same rights as others and to have an autonomous life. What is living an autonomous life? That's one big question we will be talking about here in terms of how people are subjects of the law. How can they be autonomous? What are the concrete ways we can provide them with independence and ensure that that happens? So this idea of living an autonomous life, as enshrined in Article 19 of the CRPD is something that persons with disabilities have been fighting for decades. We thought that it would be important to focus on living an autonomous life, which seems a better way of saying it rather than independent living, quote, because we are talking about autonomy in all areas of life. The challenges people face, more freedom in life. This type of thought is something we're doing through 4 workshop themes today and tomorrow. Autonomy, of course, is something people are debating heavily. Is it an individual thing? Is it more in terms of people's relations? And we'll go on with this debate, I hope, and contribute something to it. Autonomy also involves access to your choice of where to live. This is often very difficult for persons with disabilities, independent living. We see that the policies of housing first are something that can really help and can be something to encourage public policy. And this is also something that we'll be talking about, access to a place to live of your choice. That is at the heart of autonomy. And then there is an approach to capacity involving inclusion. What about institutions? What about our interdependency? That will be one of our themes as well for the workshops. And finally, as you know from our call for participation during the workshops, we'll also be talking about changing governance so that all of this could be achieved. As Isabel was saying, our coordination committee has been working on organizing this conference with our partners for several months, and now we're here at the conference, and it's quite exciting, but there are many things we hope will occur afterwards, and we hope that you will be involved, that you would like to work on the results, the proceedings, the written documents that are produced after this conference that could influence public policy. Now, on the technical level, I wanted to let you know that our workshops are designed so that we can all dialogue, we can all talk together. Thank you for having shared your contributions in advance so that we could prepare this and people could read your presentations perhaps in advance so that we could go further with the dialogue. Our updated program is available on our website. If you have any doubt about the most recent version of our program. And now I'd like to give the floor to Mrs. Christine Morin-Messabel, who is from the University of Lyon, to our campus here today. Yes, good morning, everyone. I'm happy to welcome you here on behalf of the University of Lyon, too, and the Dean of the University. I was recently appointed Vice President in charge of equality and the fight against discrimination. The University of Lyon has decided to set up a vice presidency devoted to this task. We are very committed and will be over the next few years to inclusion, equality, equal rights, and fighting against discrimination. The issue of disability is going to be something very important in all of the action I plan to take, including with partners, because, in my opinion, disability issues really involve discrimination. So that's why I think it's important to work with disability organizations. I'm happy to see how this is rolling out in this conference. And it really is related to what we plan to do at the university here in Lyon to fight discrimination. Number one, awareness. Awareness is so important, and this conference is an example of that. Awareness of all the stakeholders, including students themselves. So there are many ways to ensure anti-discrimination measures. Then there is training, which is also important. There is research. There are a number of researchers here on our campus, both men and women. And in French, she's saying this in the feminine and the masculine, which is currently the case more and more. So I'm happy to welcome my colleagues here from other structures as well. All of this is a real dynamic in terms of the action I plan to take in favor of persons with disabilities. I was looking at your program. I see quite a few key words that really attract me: autonomy, inclusion, rights, equality, and all of this is totally related to my own mission at the University of Lyon. I am a professor of social psychology, and I work on discrimination, including discrimination in research. And I am interested in the quality of life and well-being of our students. It's very important. And I'm also interested in poverty and how that impacts persons. It's really a central issue. So I'd like to thank you once again for your efforts, for your action. It's extremely important, and I will do my best to support them at all times. Thank you. Thank you. I'd like to give the floor to Bernadette Pilloy, who is the chair of the CFHG, the French National Disability Council. It's very important, our partnership with the CFHG, French National Disability Council, and because they have been major partners and of our initiative from the very beginning. Let's hear from their chair.
Alors peut-être les questions, bien sûr, de comodalité.
Okay, so she is remote, and I don't know whether our first test with her worked. I hope we'll be able to hear from her soon, but otherwise, I think I'll just give the floor directly to Frédérique Bonetti, who is the Director of Housing from the Lyon Metropolis. And I'm very happy to have you here, and I'd like to thank the Lyon Metropolis authorities for having supported us, particularly in terms of new ways to govern. This is so important in the field of housing. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Yes, indeed, for the city of Lyon, our metropolis, Capdroits is really important because it is totally related to our Housing First program. We have decided to implement at top speed Housing First here in Lyon. Maybe you're familiar with this policy, which is on the premise that access to ordinary mainstream housing is the basis for social inclusion and is something that everyone deserves, regardless of any judgment made on their capacity. They have the right to independent living. This is a real change in approach when it comes to housing policy, as well as social policies. So the participation of users is related totally to the principles of Housing First, to support people so they can have control over their lives, so they can be included in society, be full-fledged citizens, and benefit from equal status. And when it comes to housing, a better approach to persons, listening to them better, and understand their needs in terms of housing and provide them with the services they need. This is true for implementation and in terms of evaluation. They must also be involved. For the city of Lyon, reducing the number of homeless persons or persons in difficult housing situations is a priority for us. This is true for our local authorities. And in fact, sometimes the persons with disabilities have been deprived of their rights to normal housing. We now have new guidelines, we now have new support methods and new ways to organize our services. All of this represents a challenge in terms of training of persons in contact with the public, for methodology, and to roll out public policy. To meet these objectives, the City of Lyon is working on hearing a collective view, listening to the voice voice of persons concerned in what they have to say, such as the Capdroits program, without a hierarchy of knowledge, where everyone's knowledge is considered important. The City of Lyon supports the Capdroits program and the Housing First project on a long-term basis now, because we are trying to include those persons concerned themselves, and we can see how Capdroits is also involved and listening to those people in the Housing First project in Lyon. The City of Lyon supports these projects. We are working with peer workers as well to develop programs, and there are about 40 households that have benefited through a special university program in Grenoble with Housing First. We need to listen, first of all, to those users, to those persons concerned. We need to break down barriers in terms of types of knowledge. We need to think more about the terms and conditions that should apply to this new approach. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much. I think the technical problem has been resolved. Not as yet. Right, is Stéphane Corbin with us? So it's really very important for us to have Stéphane Corbin, who is the Deputy Director of the National Autonomy Council, which has an extremely important role to play, and they basically are ensuring that research is in line with knowledge production and the citizenship approach. So we're really thrilled with the support that's been renewed today, and that way we can actually have both a good balance between research and citizenship approach. Hello everybody, good morning, I hope you can hear me. I know that research is about bringing together all stakeholders, and it's not easy, especially when there are technical glitches. Now, first of all, I'd like to thank the kind words that you said about the National Solidarity Council for Autonomy. I'm also very glad to be here with you, and I'm also thrilled with the support that's been provided to the research community. Now, you've had the COVID crisis and the dual transition of population and climate. The societal challenges are really important, and we really should have a broad reflection with all stakeholders. And this, again, is extremely very important. Now, bringing together researchers and citizens is innovative approach, and it's also necessary. It's innovative because it's not very often that in knowledge development we have such open approaches with crossed perspectives. And how can we promote auto-determination without basically gathering experience from the real world? You also have said that since 2011, one of the projects supported by the CNSA should be dedicated to the support of mixed research communities with clear-cut objectives. These communities should create bridges between researchers and stakeholders, enhance knowledge distribution, and create good conditions for participative research. You've chosen the theme of independent living, and when I read this program, I really said that they're really in tune with the current reflections at CNSA, and we also bring together all stakeholders. Now, the COVID crisis has basically forced us to review the socio-medical infrastructure, and it's also forcing us to provide solutions adapted to the situation and irrespective of the type of residence where the person's living. So this means that we really have to co-design solutions while taking into account the person's wishes, and we really have to come out of this dichotomy and the inclusive society for people that we're all striving for. It really is something that will be built together with all the stakeholders. The theme that you're promoting is in line with our own thoughts. Now, experience-based knowledge was a theme in 2018 for us, and may I take the opportunity to share with you that on Tuesday, 6th of July, there's going to be the 6th edition of Researchers and Innovation on the theme of living at home, how to review the conditions. And this is basically going to echo similar concerns as of the panel discussion that you've organized during this conference about living at home and the role of institutions. Now, your conference is also supporting research and innovation and also our day-to-day actions alongside territorial players. I would like to give you two examples. First of all, the support for the development of inclusive housing. So I'd like to greet the city of Lyon, and I'd like to welcome their commitment in this respect. And this is a commitment that we have with the stakeholders in educating disabled children. Another point of convergence, amongst many others, is the point of vulnerability. So we really have to view all this, how to basically enhance and showcase the contribution of vulnerable people, and also raise awareness amongst the stakeholders and the public powers to review the paradigm of vulnerability. So the work that you're carrying out is very, very important, like the two-day conference, and we're really thrilled to listen to you and basically take home the fruit of this very hard work. So thank you so much. I wish you great proceedings. I can't be here for very long, and we really are quite attentive to what you're doing. Thank you so much for your kind attention. Thank you, Stéphane Corbin. Now, I'm just going to turn to my technical partners to see if the link with Bernadette Pilloy has been established.
Est-ce que vous nous entendez, Madame Pilloy?
Mrs. Pilloy, can you hear us, please?
Alors, je vous propose,
so
on trouvera un moment
we
où
will definitely find a moment in the day where we can establish a technical link with Mrs. Bernadette Pilloy. Now, in order to save time and not run late, let's move on to the inaugural conference. So we're going to slightly change certain things. So I'd like to thank Mrs. Morin-Messabel and Benoît, and Marie-Andrée. So I'd like to wish you a very a great conference. Thank you.
Voilà donc bonjour à toutes et à tous.
Good morning, everybody,
Bienvenue à cette
and
première
welcome to this
séquence et cette
first
conférence
session,
introductive de
the
notre
introductive session
Confcap
of our Confcap
qui
conference,
sera donnée par
which
Guillaume Le Blanc, que je vais
will
présenter dans un
be
instant.
and Mr. Guillaume Le Blanc is going
chercheur en
to
éthique et membre de la
pronounce,
coordination Capdroits.
give the address. My name
Et
is
avec
Jean-Philippe.
Jacques Lequien et
And
Chantal Bruno, mais je ne
with
sais pas si
Jacques
elle est en
Lequien
connexion avec
and
nous, parce que je
Chantal
pense
Bruno,
qu'elle
I
est à
don't know if they're
distance.
with us because
Nous
they're
animer
they're not on
cette
site.
séquence et cette
So
discussion.
we're going to be presiding and
Donc,
facilitating over this discussion.
Étant donné les orientations
Now, given
de cette conférence,
the orientation of this conference and its scientific and scientific nature and citizenship approach,
les thématiques
the
que Benoît Hérault
theme
vous a
that
rappelées
Benoît Hérault recalled on
il nous a paru tout
independent living
à fait
and independent life
de rentrer en contact
these
et
themes are extremely
Guillaume Le
important,
Blanc,
and I thought it would be very appropriate to invite Guillaume Le Blanc, who does not need an introduction, but I'm just going to give an introduction anyway. Guillaume Le Blanc is a philosopher. He's a professor of social and political philosophy at Université de Paris Diderot, after being a professor at Université Créteil, at Université de Bordeaux, and he's worked a lot on the themes that are of concern. He's worked on standards, he's worked on exclusion, vulnerability, on precariousness,
dans une perspective critique, il a
and
publié
he's also published
un très grand nombre
a variety of volumes and works on this question. Let me just quote some for you, because he does incarnate the perspective. So, maladie d'homme normal, vie ordinaire et vie précaire, invisibilité sociale, que faire de notre vulnérabilité, insurrection des vies minuscules, and very recently, la fin de l'hospitalité. So, I will say that when you look at these titles, the perspectives and themes are completely in line with the themes that we are willing to promote. So again, it's this, we really wanted him to talk about this perspective of autonomous living or independent living, and he was absolutely thrilled, and he said he is completely game to talk about it. Now, he's actually said something. He's given us a title. It's about not giving up on autonomy. So this is the title of his inaugural conference, and I'm going to give him the floor, and thank you so much for his contribution. And if we have the time, and if we definitely have some discussions with you. Thank you so much, Guillaume Le Blanc, and you've got the floor. Thank you so much for this kind introduction, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to do the inaugural speech. I wanted to be with you, but unfortunately I'm bearing witness, I think. I'm sorry, I'm basically confined due to COVID reasons. So this is precisely why I'm at home, but I'm really trying to follow all the speakers, which is making a major contribution to me. And I'm going to tell you certain things about autonomy and independent living. So I've actually bought certain ideas on not giving up on autonomy, and I think I would say one must not do it at all. I wanted to talk about the question of disability and autonomy. I thought this would be the right approach. Now, this can be explained that we're all faced with vulnerabilities of various degrees, multiple vulnerabilities, mixed vulnerabilities that reveal that autonomy is a problem. It's a problem and a desire as well. And I think this is what I feel. It's about isolating disability to basically crystallize it and where we would absorb the problem of vulnerability. And I think this would be completely counterproductive. And this is really not in line with my approach. So I really want to look at disability from a prism of autonomy. And I really would like to say that I have 8 points to make, and these 8 points are a kind of and I think these 8 sheets, or these 8 points that would be turned into sheets would be circulated. So I'm going to talk about 8 points which are extremely important. First point is the title itself. You should not give up on autonomy. Now, this is a title which I felt is extremely enlightening and important because because this reminded me of Freud's sentence. Thank you so much for these sheets that you're pulling out. So Freud says that you really should not, you should give in to your desire. So if this is something that makes someone lively and living, is the desire. So it's really important to basically fulfill your desires. So each person should basically do something to work on himself to see what are the important desires, insofar as all desires are not the same and are not worth fulfilling. So there are certain essential desires, so we could call them fundamental or basic desires, or these are desires that really help a person to fulfill himself. Now, I really think I agree with this. The desire of autonomy is not only an essential desire, but it's also a desire from where all other desires actually take on meaning. Not desiring autonomy is about not existing. And at the same time, the desire of autonomy is an essential desire. And I'm sidetracking here because I'm talking of the desire of autonomy instead of real autonomy. And yet, the desire of autonomy is an essential desire. It means that autonomy is not something that is obvious. It's not something easy to achieve. It is very difficult to be completely autonomous or independent, and it's sometimes impossible to be autonomous at times. And yet, even though if I'm not autonomous, I will continue desiring autonomy. I will continue desiring to be independent, and it's this desire that actually gives meaning to my existence. And I think it's very, very important to start off with this approach, to start from this viewpoint. You have to want to exist by yourself, and you have to be as least dependent on others as possible. From an etymological perspective, if you look at the word autonomy, we've got this idea that can be divided. We can actually say auto and nemos, and autonomy is the fact of being self-sufficient, not accepting that your life standard is in the hands of the others, is dictated by others. So it's the desire that is devoid of any kind of submission. So this is what you desire when you want to be autonomous. So there is a form of social ill. It's a form of pathology when your own life standards is completely stifled by the norms or the standards of others. So a person who is disabled, if the person desires to have a house, the desire to have a house is rather unique because the person does not want to be institutionalized. And this desire to live independently in a house must be taken into account, otherwise you're negating the existence of the person. So this is one thing I'd like to share with you. And my second sheet. Now, there are two types of violence. Now, these, in fact, are serious, even though the seriousness or the gravity is not the same. So there is a first type of violence when we are going to reduce a person to his disability. So when you are reducing a person who's sick to his sickness, when you reduce a person, an unemployed person, to his unemployed status. And we spoke about these categories previously, and we know that reducing someone is about imprisoning someone in a category, putting someone in a category. So defining someone on the basis of his disability, in fact, is negating his existence. He's a person a person is living a life with a disability, and but the person, in fact, is not disabled, or he cannot be defined by his disability, and his disability does not absorb the person. So when the person is reduced to his disability, this is the first form of violence. There's a second form of violence, which is symmetrical, almost symmetrical, and it goes the other way around. Now, it's about refusing to understand and see that a person is living with a disability, because we are not going to take into account that a person is living with a sickness or is living with a major social faculty, without a major social faculty like work. But because we do not consider this person anymore as a vulnerable person if we refuse to acknowledge his disability. So we talked about vulnerability, and my whole speech is going to try and make a link between vulnerability and autonomy, insofar as understanding the autonomy of a person basically is understanding his vulnerability. It's about looking at the forms of vulnerability. Disability is a form of vulnerability, but there are other forms of vulnerability other than disability, which involve types of communication or sharing that is possible because of this vulnerability. And everyone is concerned by this. So there's an initial violence happens when we reduce a person to his disability or sickness, and there is a second form of violence when we only see the disability or the sickness or the social violence that the person is inflicted with. And we are, in both cases, we are basically negating the vulnerability of the person. So here, I'm just going to ask you to observe that this notion of vulnerability has developed in our day-to-day life vocabulary, but also in modern social rhetorics, and also in the medical social literature and social policies and in environmental policies. This word has actually become a rather important word, and its importance is often exaggerated because it has become a category, an umbrella term where you put everything, and you also include the social, the medical, and the perspective into this. But of course, this is just a very historical approach. I also have noted that from the 19th century, we were focused on Les Misérables. So look at Victor Hugo's novel Les Misérables, and now we are focused on the vulnerable people. So we're no longer dealing with miserable people, but vulnerable people. It does not mean that poverty has disappeared. No, people are poorly housed. All that is still there. But it means that the way we look at social problems from now on uses the rhetoric of vulnerability and not miserability. So this is extremely important because in misery there was the fear of social fracture, of people who are in misery and out of misery, between people who've been included and excluded. But I think this modern reluctance, which is embodied by vulnerability and not misery, it basically is more to do with the notion of inclusion. We all fear being not included enough or not included at all. This uncertainty of modern times, especially with COVID, has in fact instilled this fear to a deeper extent. So this fear of insufficient inclusion. The notion of vulnerability has at least one advantage, even though you've got to be very careful. It really forces us to think of the fact that our inclusion modes are not that obvious. They are fragile, they are precarious, and our inclusion modes are plain vulnerable. And what I really want to say in my third sheet is that, so I call this presentation, you should not give in to vulnerability insofar as negating vulnerability is about negating, it tantamounts to negating human reality. No one can say that I am invulnerable. And if you remember Greek tales, Homer, for instance, you will remember this very fierce warrior, Achilles, who was so strong, and I think it's not the Odyssey, it's the Iliad. He was vulnerable. It was his heel, and that's why we have the expression Achilles' heel, and this is how he died. So you see, there is a form of vulnerability in each and every individual. Vulnerability is something that makes a human being exist, and at the same time it makes him weak, and it also gives him the human component. So we can say very, very strongly that it's inhuman to be not vulnerable. So if God exists, he is not vulnerable, but again, God is God. God's not human. And if angels existed, they are invulnerable, but they are not human again. So life is about being vulnerable, and living is about dealing with this vulnerability. So vulnerable comes from a Latin word, vulnus, which means a wound. So being vulnerable means that you can be hurt. Achilles is vulnerable because his heel was weak and he could be hurt there. And at the same time, being vulnerable is also about the capacity. It's not only about being hurt and exposed to injury, but also providing a response to this injury. To the individual basically responds to what hurts him. So the question is, how does he respond? So it was basically, there was an interesting discussion from a linguistic perspective between vulnerability and fragility. Now, in fragility, the response of a person cannot exist. Being fragile is being without a response. And we can understand that by making comparison between a crystal glass and a human being. So a crystal glass is fragile, not vulnerable, because if I break it, it's going to break. It's in its structure. It has no way to resist the break. Whereas a vulnerable person, if the person falls down, and I'm sorry, if a vulnerable person, when he falls down, does not break, he will try and get up, and he may not succeed, but he will definitely try getting up.
And to be able to get up, that person who is vulnerable needs other people to help them get up, who may also be vulnerable. You need support, aid, care, and this point is extremely important in my opinion. So what I mean by that is that we are all vulnerable, and our common vulnerability, including common with those persons with disabilities, should force us to think about how our existence is intertwined, is important because of our relations, our care for each other, which is why living a life with a disability puts you in a vulnerable situation. But precisely because you're in a vulnerable situation, you can continue to have an active life, fight against this vulnerability, and this effort must now become part of a whole support system of aid and care. Now I'd like to briefly discuss this in terms of the idea how we must not give up on care institutions. Because I would say that we ourselves fight against our own vulnerability, but also through not only self-help, but others' help, including the help of institutions. These 3 points are important because if an institution fights against vulnerability without the person themselves fighting against their own vulnerability, it will be a violent situation. It won't work. If I fight against my own vulnerability alone without the support of an institution, it will also be a violent situation, and there will not be a response by society to my problem of vulnerability. So we are fighting against vulnerability through various forms of aid. Number one, self-help, and being recognized as having the capacity to act and manage your vulnerability, and then helping each other, relations with people who you're close with, your family, your loved ones, your neighbors, anyone who's working with you, and this will make it possible to support a vulnerable person, including those persons with disabilities. So that's at one level. Everyone supports each other. But this support becomes only effective when it is fully implemented by institutions. That's where what is at the heart of social and medical institutions support. And this is part of an ethical and philosophical methodology and movement, taking care of people. This is also in feminist culture, the idea of institutions taking care of others, because without this policy, there would be no support for persons with vulnerabilities. It's up to each region, each territory to determine its policy of support for persons in vulnerable situations. And what I mean by that is that the health of a democracy is recognized by the central position it gives or does not give to these care institutions. All of these care institutions are themselves vulnerable, may not be sustainable, and the more a democracy is fragile, the more these institutions will be vulnerable, and it turns into a vicious circle. There is the vulnerability of the persons themselves, and then the vulnerability of our institutions taking care of these people. On the other hand, you may have a virtuous circle where the vulnerability of persons is recognized right at the heart of society because the care institutions have a central role to play in that society. So I'd like to think about what the philosopher Margaret said in a very interesting work entitled A Decent Society. This idea of decency is really the focus of my work. Margaret said, a decent society is a society where institutions do not humiliate people. And indeed, there is humiliation that occurs when an institution, instead of protecting people, is actually violent towards people. When institutions, instead of supporting people, expose them to even greater vulnerability. And so now I have a fifth slide to share with you, I feel is essential, which shows the connection between vulnerability and autonomy. In general, these are opposing forces, vulnerability versus autonomy, just like we say dependency versus independency. And the first should be negative and the second positive. Well, this is a false view of people. It was developed by the individualistic philosophy we see in today's society. It's almost an official philosophy these days, but there are actually two points of view, the point of view of autonomy and the point of view of vulnerability. And both of these points of view come together to define human reality. I would like to send you a text I feel is essential. It's Paul Ricard, the French philosopher, who wrote a book called Justice. He wrote in 2015 that there was a paradox between autonomy and fragility and vulnerability. There are these two different standpoints, and the two terms come together. Autonomy may be possible for persons in vulnerable situations, but persons in vulnerable situations or who are fragile can become autonomous and can be called on to become autonomous. Because to understand human life, we need both standpoints. We need to understand the standpoint of autonomy and the standpoint of vulnerability. They need to come together. And precisely, we must determine how this is interrelated, because if we believe that we are autonomous, we should still think about the points where we are vulnerable, and we should not give up. But when we think or feel we are vulnerable, and we want to be even more autonomous, we should not give up on autonomy either. Ricoeur goes on with his analysis to say, excuse me, says Benoit, I'm sorry, we're running a little bit out of time. Could you maybe wrap this up in 2 or 3 minutes? Thank you. Yes, no problem. So Ricoeur says that the law plays a central role as it allows us to build this link between vulnerability and autonomy. As you see here in slide 6, capacity cannot be necessarily opposed with incapacity. There must be a reference to both. You have capacity because you could also have incapacity. It's just the other side of the coin in one way or another. So I would say in conclusion that we need to preserve, here in my 7th slide, this idea of how the law can link up vulnerability and autonomy. If you take a quick look at the CRDP, you will find a very interesting idea several times in the text of the convention, and it is almost the leitmotif of the convention. Persons with disabilities must be able to live on an equal basis with others. It comes back time and again, on an equal basis with others. And this is very strong. This means that we need to eliminate inequality. Even stronger, you see in the convention that it says on an equal basis with others. Others are usually people who are different, people that aren't like us, persons with disabilities, who are ill, who are marginalized, on the fringe of society. But here we're talking about on an equal basis with others, i.e. those people who are supposedly part of mainstream society, who are normal. And we should also look at persons as equals. This is what they are saying in the convention. This should make people aware you are always different from other people. But the main thing is that we all have equality regardless of the way we exist and live. Second, the relations and existence among people only exist because of a hospitable relationship and not violence. We are all interrelated. If you don't believe that, it's because you have forgotten all the links between all human beings and those who we are living with, as well as those we don't know, who live elsewhere and who are still part of our own existence. As we saw with the COVID-19 crisis, daily work of butchers, bakers, garbage collectors really made us understand our dependency on all of these people that we do not know, without whom we could not even exist. So those were the ideas I wanted to share with you today. Thank you for your attention. Thank you, Guillaume Le Blanc. Very clear and very nice keynote presentation to start off our day. I know that it will not always be easy when we have these remote presentations, but we'll be right back, and I hope you'll stay with us, and we'll be expecting you for the debate afterwards in about 10 minutes. Wonderful. Thank you. I would like to introduce Marie-Andrée Blanc, who is with us, and the president of the French Economic and Social Council, and also the chair of UNAF, a service provider organization on a national level in France. Thank you for inviting UNAF. And I'm also the vice president of the French Council, the French Economic and Social and Environmental Council. I wanted to get across a very important message on our behalf and on behalf of families. Many people over the last 20 years have been talking about concepts such as independent living, inclusion, and some of this has become a reality. However, 20 years after the 2002 French law that was supposed to modernize the medical and medical social sectors and the rights of patients, we can make several observations. Okay, yes, mindsets have changed, but there is still so much to do because the opinions and the prejudices of persons can be very deep. There are quite a few initiatives implemented, but the difficulties are continuing, and the participation of persons is not yet seen enough in medical and social practices. This is why a conference such as this, organized by Capdroits, is absolutely necessary to think about new prospects. This will participate in a new acculturation, placing professionals and practitioners, researchers, and persons with lived experience on the same level. UNAF is an institution representing families above all, and our experiential knowledge is one of the important aspects institutions must take into consideration. Our place as impacted by institutions and public policy, what we call service users, is absolutely decisive if we want to change people's mindsets, mentalities, and practices. UNAF is a member of Association Les Savoirs, which is a nonprofit organization to recognize all types of knowledge that they may have gained through their illness, through their life, through disabilities, or whatever they do, in order to adjust professional practices to make them more efficient. Medical and social medical practices are all part of this issue, which is why we regularly organize webinars and meetings to exchange practices among the various regional chapters of UNAF, called UDAFs. We have a very open mind. We want to know also what's going on beyond our borders. International law plays an important role in these fundamental issues. The UN CRPD, for example, is pushing us to a new paradigm. And I think that in particular, legal protection of adults through guardianship is one thing that will change. It's even more important for persons in difficulty than any other citizen. We're talking about family values, social aspects, and certain activities, and protecting the life and health of everyone. UDAF and UNAF, just like every association, have been committed since the beginning of the health crisis, particularly during the confinements that were very difficult for persons with disabilities as well as the elderly. Regardless of the service you're talking about, if it's guardianship, if it's support to parents, if it's other support for persons with disabilities, must all avoid situations of panic and isolation of persons. As soon as the pandemic broke out, we put together support, assistance, and got closer to our members. Professionals had to change their practices overnight to do unimaginable things, initially respond to the needs of persons, and we're talking about fundamental needs of persons in vulnerable situation and their families, so that we could take swift action to help. The guardianship organizations supported by UNAF have in particular worked very hard for those people who benefit from guardianship to ensure the quality of their protection, maintain their autonomy to the extent they are capable. UNAF has been involved in convincing bank branches to open even during the pandemic so that persons with disabilities could make cash withdrawals. UNAF has fought for the respect of the will of persons with disabilities in connection with the vaccination campaigns. We have now been able to measure how hard it is for people to get information, how landmarks are missing, how it must be action and not just theory, particularly when it is a very extreme situation. Our values and principles mean that there are demands on the culture of professional and volunteers. Brigitte Bourguignon, the minister delegated by the Minister of Health for Autonomy, has set up a mission on ethics in terms of elderly persons' concerns. Last January, there was a landmark document that was issued, and we are continuing to work on a ethical charter for support. UNAF is supporting this and a member of this commission so that people will see things in terms of the real lives of persons with disabilities and their families. Finally, housing is extremely important, and I'm very happy to see that on the program for the next 2 days. It's right, it is a burning issue. Thinking of the Wellfam report from 2020 in France, inclusive housing has really taken off in France over the last few years. Housing is often seen as protection, something that gives structure to people's lives, safety. You are supposed to feel at home and trust where you live as a free choice, but this private, intimate space must not lead to isolation you suffer from. It must be part of the immediate environment, in a neighborhood, in the community. And there are challenges in life, and if you are losing your autonomy due to a disability, illness, or aging, for example, living alone at home requires support from your friends, or should you choose an institution, sometimes the solutions are not adapted to the needs and interests or preferences of the persons. So what we call inclusive housing could be an alternative, allowing the person to choose to live at home in mainstream housing based on 3 community principles: consent, to share your housing with another person, where each person has their own space, but then they share time in places that are common, such as living rooms, etc. Agreed to support by professionals who are there to ensure well-being and the proper environment of this co-housing unit. Then, being included in the community, whether you're in a village, in a rural area, or in the city, having shops and services nearby is also essential to be a full-fledged citizen in the community. The state is trying to work on these inclusive housing projects that are part and parcel of the community, and this is extremely important. And in fact, financial resources have been devoted to this and have now been secured. UNAF and our regional chapters, UDAF, are supporting this and have for the last 20 years, particularly through our governance, our families. We have host families as who can house persons, and through the respect we have for each other, there is definitely a dynamic participation. We need to understand how collegial decisions need to be made for co-housing and solidarity among neighbors, among peers, among everyone has now been observed in these co-housing units. I think it's an excellent choice for inclusion and really part of this whole conference and your themes. I hope you have a wonderful 2 days. I'm sure it will give you a lot of food for thought to inspire our policymakers. And I personally will definitely have a lot to say about what your work at our French Council, Economic, Social, and Environmental Council. It is also important, particularly in the field of health. Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Blanc. Hi, my name is Jacques. I would like to speak now to open the debate. And can you hear me?
Est-ce que vous m'entendez? Oui.
We now have Bernadette Pilloy, who is chair of the French National Council, Disability Council for European questions. And we also work on international questions. It's called the CFHE. The CFHE is the official French National Disability Council. We are a bridge between European and international affairs and French affairs. We are a real stakeholder in terms of monitoring the application of the UNCRPD in France, that France signed in 2010. And we represent civil society. We are very happy and would like to thank you for inviting us to this conference, which is already extremely exciting. And as far as what I've heard this morning, I will be brief. We at the CFHE National Disability Council, from the very beginning, have been in full agreement with the work Capdroits is doing, and in particular this year. I haven't heard much about Article 19 yet so far today, but we know that it is, of course, at the heart of the work you're doing these next 2 days, because these themes, autonomy, choice, and inclusion, motivate all of us. Because at your conference today, we can see that you have persons with disability, with lived experience, such as myself, who are here, professionals and researchers. It's so important that we work together to make progress. As was said, and I'm taking advantage of what I heard earlier, for people to understand that we are not necessarily in a miserable situation. We are in a vulnerable situation. We are not an object of care. We are a subject of the law. And I think that is what is going to be the leading theme in this conference. The CFHE National Disability Council is here to listen to your recommendations so that we can pass them on to the French authorities. At the same time, we are aware that we in France are part of a whole community in Europe, and good practices throughout Europe can be important examples for us all to learn from. We are all faced with the same challenges, the same fight. Regardless of where the person with disabilities lives, we must have autonomy. We must be full-fledged citizens. Thank you for listening, and thank you again for inviting us to this absolutely fantastic conference. Thank you, madam. Thank you for those last 2 presentations. How motivating for us to hear all of your support for our program. Let's go back to Guillaume Le Blanc, our philosopher. I'm right here. Great. I just wanted to make sure because I can't see you on the screen. Here I am. Okay, great. Thank you for waiting on the sidelines until we could get you back on the screen for a 10-minute exchange with the audience, and people can ask questions or comment on what you had to say, particularly autonomy and persons with disabilities. I see someone raising their hand already. Please go ahead. Hello, Guillaume. I'm Pierre Ansay. Oh, hi, Pierre. Well, I was very interested in your conclusion earlier about reversibility, which is not exactly reciprocity we talk a lot about. I heard you said something about changing views, reversing views, sharing views. I think all of that is prior condition. It's like a reciprocity where you give and take, even when people have different levels of capacity. Do you agree with this idea that reversibility, as you presented it, is a first step towards reciprocity?
Thank you, Pierre, for this question. Indeed, I want to say yes, and at the same time, I'm going to see where this first step towards reciprocity will lead to. If you look at this from a broad perspective, and if you think about existence ever since the relations between autonomy and vulnerability have been established, but what I tried to do, we will realize that what is really important for existence is a variety of factors, and I'm trying to understand how can autonomy be rolled out within a set of vulnerabilities. Now, in this perspective, and I can also take the opportunity to basically comment on the previous speaker. Madam, you said that we are no longer in a miserable situation, but in a vulnerable situation. I totally agree with you there, but I understand what you're saying. We're no longer objects. We're no longer an existence that are subject to institution. We are capable of managing on our own. And I really think this is very, very powerful, because we're talking of rights here. But in my perspective, you see, care is a central value. And I'm not talking of medical care or therapeutic care. I'm talking about taking care. Taking care is a central value to all existence. And I'm just going to give you a very quick example that shows you this, that illustrates this. You see, there's a play that has Uncle Vanya of Tchaikovsky. Now, there is a central character who is a professor who writes books, who plays, who considers himself to be important. He spends his time writing and reading, and he is extremely disparaging with others and epitomizes pretension. In fact, his activity of a writer, of a professor, you see, is made possible because of the fact that because around him there are so many women who are in his service, and they are the ones who allow him to write. These are people who do his shopping, who prepare his meals, and he can basically just devote himself to his work because people are taking care of him, but he doesn't take care of them, and he hates them. And he's disdainful. So this is not reciprocity. So reciprocity is central in any human relationship. And it's central also, it is also central to take care. Now, as a shared value, it's something that is shared by everybody. And if people who take care of others should also be taken care of. And I think you really cannot make a distinction here. Thank you so much. One more question, so that we don't run late. Anyone? My name is Thierry Rousseau. I have trained in Lyon. You talked about independent living. But someone who's in other psychiatric care should be in a position to make a prescription for himself. You see, when a person is in psychiatric care, when he wants some kind of something, I'm sorry, I'm lost for my words. You see, someone in a psychiatric using psychiatric care in psychiatric care. I'm sorry, I'm repeating myself. I can't get my words out properly. I think it's important that there are tools to make the person independent. The person should be able to have a minimum of autonomy. I don't know if this is going to be possible. I'm sorry for phrasing my question like this. No, absolutely not. And you're very clear in your questioning. I completely understand you, and you've actually understood my speech, and this is exactly what I want to say. You really cannot give up on your desire to be autonomous. Let's take the example of psychiatry. Yes, you are right. When a patient is undergoing psychiatric care, and it's valid for all types of care. When he has a request, I think this request must be listened to. And in psychiatry, and it's also the case for medicine, we know how patients with HIV really had to struggle to have some kind of intimity, private space in the hospital rooms. And in psychiatry, we tend to ignore the patient's demands. And this is a very, very major problem, especially in psychiatry, because psychiatry basically affects mental balance. And I totally understand you really need to remind this. The question is, how do we do it? We really need to drive home again the desire of autonomy, and this desire must be listened to. Now, should there be a point of contact for the patients or a patient's union, or perhaps the person himself who's hospitalized? So we really have to look at psychiatry from the patient's perspective, and I really think it's extremely important because you say that there are demands for private space, there are demands for having a personal room and on all this must be taken into account or factored in. Well, thank you so much. I would like to warmly thank Guillaume Le Blanc for his intervention and also the various sheets, because these sheets are very clear and we will be able to use them again. It's a very well drafted, concise document, so thank you so much for these sheets that you showed us, and I'm quite sure that we will continue this conversation. And I really hope I should be able to come there soon. Now, just to move on to the panel discussion that will ensue, we are also going to give you headsets because some of the interventions are going to be in English, and you might want to hear the simultaneous interpretation into French. Now, if you want headsets for simultaneous interpretation into French, do raise your hands, please. So please do not leave the hall, the room with your headsets, because they're very expensive and we might lose them. So please return the headsets when you're going to leave the auditorium.